The end of the world may not begin with an explosion. It could begin with the lights going out, a silent cyber attack that brings civilization to its knees, or an ocean that suddenly stops giving life. These aren't supernatural nightmares. They're real scenarios scientists have warned could happen. And if even one of them becomes reality, there may be nothing anyone can do to stop it. It didn't begin with an explosion. It began with an ordinary sunrise. On a quiet morning in late September, observatories around the world detected an enormous solar flare erupting from the surface of the sun. Events like this had happened before, and scientists initially believed Earth's magnetic field would shield us from the worst of it. They were wrong. Within hours, satellites began failing one after another. GPS signals disappeared without warning. Commercial aircraft lost navigation systems over the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Air traffic controllers scrambled to guide hundreds of flights using little more than radio communication. Then the power went out. Not in one city, not in one country, across entire continents. The electrical grid collapsed faster than anyone thought possible. High voltage transformers, the backbone of modern civilization, overheated and failed almost simultaneously. Many exploded. Others simply died without warning. The lights didn't come back on. Engineers quickly realized the truth. Replacing a single transformer could take months under normal circumstances. Thousands had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. There weren't enough replacements on Earth. By the second day, cell towers had exhausted their backup batteries. Internet service vanished. Television stations went dark. Emergency broadcasts became impossible. Families had no way of contacting each other, and governments struggled to communicate with their own citizens. Hospitals became the next victims. Backup generators kept intensive care units running for a while, but fuel supplies were limited. Roads were gridlocked with abandoned vehicles, making deliveries nearly impossible. Doctors were forced to decide which patients would receive the last remaining electricity. Supermarkets emptied within hours. Without electronic payment systems, people could no longer buy food. Refrigeration failed, and tons of meat, dairy products, and medicines spoiled in the heat. Water treatment plants shut down, leaving entire cities without safe drinking water. Then panic took over. Crowds gathered outside stores that had nothing left to sell. Pharmacies were stripped bare. Gas stations became battlegrounds as drivers fought over the last usable fuel. Police departments were overwhelmed. Military units were deployed to protect food warehouses, water facilities, and hospitals, but there simply weren't enough personnel to maintain order everywhere at once. The greatest threat wasn't violence, it was silence. Without satellites, weather forecasting stopped. Emergency responders couldn't coordinate rescue efforts. Cargo ships drifted without reliable navigation. Trains sat motionless on tracks. Financial markets disappeared overnight. The modern world had been built on invisible systems that almost no one ever thought about. Now they were all gone. Weeks passed. Cities that once glowed through the night became completely dark. Looking across the skyline, there wasn't a single light visible for miles. The only sounds after sunset were distant generators and people searching for supplies. Scientists estimated that restoring the electrical grid could take years, if it could be rebuilt at all. Then another problem emerged. Nuclear power plants depended on continuous cooling systems. Most had emergency generators, but fuel wasn't unlimited. Governments rushed to prevent multiple reactor failures while already struggling to provide food and clean water to millions of people. Every decision became a choice between two disasters. Winter arrived. Without electricity, millions of homes lost heat. Pipes froze and burst. Elderly residents and young children became the most vulnerable. Entire communities gathered in schools, churches, and warehouses. The world didn't end in fire. It ended one failed system at a time. Historians would later call it the Great Blackout. Scientists called it a geomagnetic superstorm. Most people simply remembered it as the day civilization stopped working. The most unsettling part is that this isn't science fiction. Events like this have happened before. In 1859, the Carrington event caused telegraph systems to fail across the world, sparked fires, and produced auroras visible near the equator. At the time, humanity wasn't dependent on electricity. Today, our civilization is. Scientists continue to monitor the sun because they know another extreme solar storm is not a matter of if, only when. And if that day comes, the first sign may be nothing more than a notification on your phone, warning you that a powerful solar storm is approaching. By the time you read it, it may already be too late. It started with a single software update. On a cold Monday morning, millions of people woke up expecting an ordinary day. Phones buzzed with notifications, banks opened their doors, cargo ships crossed the oceans, airplanes prepared for takeoff, hospitals changed shifts. No one realized the update installed overnight had already begun spreading through the world's most critical computer systems. At first, the failures seemed unrelated. A major bank in London suddenly lost access to every customer account. An airport in Chicago grounded hundreds of flights after its radar systems went offline. A shipping port in Singapore stopped loading cargo when every crane froze in place. Engineers blamed technical glitches. They couldn't have been more wrong. Within 2 hours, the same failures appeared across dozens of countries. Power companies lost communication with substations. Water treatment facilities stopped responding to operators. Traffic lights began flashing randomly before shutting off completely. Emergency dispatch centers struggled to answer 911 calls. As their networks became overloaded, cybersecurity experts quickly reached a terrifying conclusion. This wasn't ransomware. It wasn't a virus. It was something far more sophisticated. The malicious code had spent months quietly spreading through software updates used by governments, hospitals, banks, transportation companies, and power utilities. It had remained completely dormant until receiving a single encrypted command. When that command arrived, everything activated at once. Financial markets immediately suspended trading. ATMs stopped working. Credit and debit cards were declined everywhere. People stood in grocery stores with carts full of food, unable to pay for any of it. Gas stations shut down as payment systems failed. Long lines stretched for miles while drivers desperately searched for the few stations still operating with cash. Then the internet began disappearing. Major data centers shut themselves down to prevent further damage, but it was already too late. Cloud services failed one after another. Businesses lost years of records. Government databases became inaccessible. Entire communication networks went silent. Hospitals entered emergency mode. Doctors suddenly lost access to patient records, laboratory results, and medical imaging. Some operating rooms continued procedures using backup power, while staff relied on handwritten notes for the first time in decades. Air traffic controllers switched to emergency procedures as navigation systems became unreliable. Hundreds of flights were diverted or delayed, while pilots relied on older navigation methods and constant radio communication. Meanwhile, supply chains collapsed. Modern grocery stores typically carry only a few days' worth of inventory. Without functioning logistics software, warehouses couldn't track shipments, truck drivers couldn't receive delivery instructions, and fuel distribution slowed to a crawl. Store shelves emptied within 48 hours. Cities that depended on daily deliveries suddenly had nothing left to distribute. Governments declared national emergencies. Military units were deployed to protect power stations, water facilities, hospitals, and food distribution centers. Curfews were introduced in several major cities as panic buying turned into looting. But restoring the systems proved nearly impossible. The malware wasn't simply deleting files. It was silently corrupting backups. Every attempt to restore damaged networks reactivated the attack. The world had become trapped inside its own technology. Weeks later, cybersecurity investigators uncovered what made the attack so devastating. The malicious code had exploited trusted software used by thousands of organizations around the world. Every automatic update had unknowingly installed another piece of the attack. By the time anyone noticed unusual activity, nearly every critical network had already been compromised. Recovery took months. Some regions recovered faster than others. Many never fully did. The attack became known as Black Monday, the day the digital world nearly collapsed. The frightening part, experts have warned for years that a coordinated cyber attack against critical infrastructure is entirely possible. Governments regularly train for scenarios involving attacks on power grids, financial systems, hospitals, and communication networks because modern civilization depends on interconnected technology. The next global crisis may not begin with missiles or explosions. It may begin with a notification asking you to install the latest software update, and by the time anyone realizes what came with it, the world everyone depends on could already be shutting down. The oceans went quiet. For generations, fishermen had described the sea as alive. Even on its calmest days, there was always movement beneath the surface. Schools of fish, migrating whales, seabirds diving for food. Then, almost overnight, that movement began to disappear. At first, scientists believed they were witnessing another temporary shift caused by warming oceans. But research vessels returning from the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans all reported the same disturbing discovery. The fish were gone. Not dead, just gone. Sonar that once detected millions of marine animals now showed vast stretches of empty water. Commercial fishing fleets spent weeks at sea without filling a single net. Within months, seafood markets around the world began closing. People assumed they could simply eat something else. They didn't realize how much of the planet depended on healthy oceans. The collapse spread faster than anyone expected. Phytoplankton, the microscopic organisms drifting near the ocean's surface, began dying in enormous numbers. Invisible to the human eye, they produce nearly half of the oxygen we breathe and form the foundation of almost every marine food chain. As they disappeared, everything above them followed. Small fish starved. Larger predators vanished soon after. Whales washed ashore by the hundreds. Entire coral reefs turned white before crumbling into lifeless rock. Then came the smell. Coastlines around the world filled with millions of dead sea creatures. Beaches that once attracted tourists became impossible to approach. The air carried the odor of decay for miles inland, forcing entire communities to evacuate. Scientists worked around the clock searching for an answer. Some blamed rising ocean temperatures. Others pointed to acidification caused by decades of increasing carbon dioxide. Several researchers feared they were witnessing a chain reaction, multiple environmental stresses, pushing the oceans past a tipping point from which they could no longer recover. Whatever the cause, the damage wasn't slowing down. The consequences reached far beyond the sea. More than 3 billion people rely on the ocean as a major source of food and income. Coastal economies began collapsing. Millions lost their livelihoods almost overnight. Nations competed for shrinking food supplies, driving prices to levels many families could no longer afford. As storms became more unpredictable and coastal infrastructure deteriorated, major ports struggled to operate. International trade slowed, and shortages spread across nearly every industry. Freshwater supplies became less reliable in many regions, as changing ocean temperatures disrupted long-established weather patterns. Droughts intensified, crops failed, entire farming regions struggled to produce enough food. Governments declared states of emergency. Aid organizations warned of the largest humanitarian crisis in modern history. Mass migrations began as people fled coastlines that could no longer support them. Communities that had lived beside the sea for centuries abandoned their homes, not because the water had risen, but because the ocean had stopped providing life. Years later, the beaches were silent. No gulls circled overhead. No fishing boats crossed the horizon. No dolphins broke the surface. Children born after the collapse grew up believing the ocean had always been empty. History books told a different story. They spoke of blue whales the size of airplanes, coral reefs visible from space, schools of fish so large they could be seen from satellites. To the next generation, it sounded like mythology. The most unsettling part is that scientists have long warned that marine ecosystems are under increasing pressure from overfishing, warming waters, pollution, acidification, and biodiversity loss. While a sudden worldwide collapse like this is fictional, the underlying risks are real, and researchers continue to study how close some ecosystems may be to irreversible tipping points. The end of the world may not arrive with fire or an asteroid. It could begin beneath the waves, long before anyone on land realizes something is terribly wrong.